of all the work that I've done, I think raising my children has been the one that I have enjoyed the most. Leading them to Jesus. And I will introduce my family to you tomorrow afternoon. But that's my husband, Ron, and my oldest is Stacy. She's the one that's sitting up there. And then the one sitting below is Autumn. And I'll introduce you to them tomorrow afternoon. But they are my pride and joy. I don't know why, but when I had my children, I just decided I was going to homeschool them. At that time, it wasn't legal, and it wasn't popular. As a matter of fact, I was turned in by my neighbor, but I had already taken all the tests that I needed. So when the truant officer came to my house, I had all the legal document. And I got to know the superintendent very well. And when my name came across to homeschool the next year, he just said, oh, yeah, it's her. Just let her go. And so he said, my girl's always tested 2 to 3 grades ahead of all the other children. So he just said, keep doing what you were doing. So it was nice. It was nice him working with me. But I really enjoyed it. But I've done a lot of traveling around, and I've gone to Sweden and different places. And I find that a lot of parents are just not knowing what to do, that they have children that are just misbehaving, and they try talking and reasoning and yelling or asking them to do things, nagging them. But instead of getting character change, they're getting children that are ignoring them, maybe screaming at them. And so parents are trying spankings and times out and ignoring and anything that you could do to try take away computer time, put an iPhone in front of them, whatever they do to try to get behavior, and yet they're not getting what they want. And so I was in the same boat. You know, I didn't know what to do with my children either, and I started going to some of the mothers in Israel, but as I watched the children, I noticed they didn't know what to do either. So the only place I knew to go is on my knees, and I said, Lord, I just need help. I don't know how to raise godly children. And I was anything but godly. Matter of fact, I was what was called a motorcycle mama at that time. I actually was in a biking group, a really bad experience for me. But I was very rebellious, and they were the epitome of rebellion. And so I was not coming from a Christian experience at all. So to raise my children godly, I wasn't even sure how to do such a thing. And anyway, so the Lord started showing me, people started noticing what was going on, and they said, would you come and work with me in our home? So for 11 years, I actually went into homes with parents to work with them, to try to help them in their experience. And so a lot of things that I have here are things that I've done myself, that I worked with my own children, and then just being in other homes and working with them. So I'm going to share. Now, I made a lot of mistakes as I went, but God is gracious when we're learning how to do this. He works with us. And children want to be righteous. I've never had an experience, one time, that I had a child that did not want Jesus. You know, all the other ones want godliness. They want to be in heaven. They want to love the Lord. But this one boy, he didn't want to, and he really needed some 2x4 diplomacy is what he needed. But I know that that wasn't going to be allowed, so I told the mother, I've done all I can do for you. There's nothing, he needs more than what you're allowing me to do. And so she left. I never knew what happened to him after that, but he was a very rebellious young man. And so, like I said, that's the only time I've had one that didn't know what to do. Now I'm going to go through this. This is the European cuckoo bird, and I'm going to go through it with your children. And when you're all done, if you want to dismiss, you can go in the other room. But I thought maybe you would enjoy this one. How many of you have ever heard of the European cuckoo bird? Has anyone ever heard of him? In America, he's known as the common cuckoo bird, or he's known as the cowbird. Now, most birds, when they actually want to have babies, they will start building a nest. And nests come in all different shapes and sizes. And there's a couple of these here. That's an interesting one, isn't it? But this bird doesn't want just a nest. He's going to go find somebody else. He's called a brood parasite bird. And she won't take the time building her own nest. She's going to go find a nest. But not just any nest. She actually wants a nest that has eggs in it. And the reason is she does not want to raise her own babies. She wants somebody else to raise the babies. And so she's going to be looking for this bird. And these are the ones that she has chosen. She will either lay her birds in the nest of a red-eyed vireo bird, a weed warbler, a yellow runt warbler, And once she finds a nest she likes, she sits and she waits. And she waits until the mother flies away. And when the mother flies away, she will go in and eat one of the eggs, turn around and lay one or two in the nest, and then she flies away. She doesn't do it just once. She does it 14 different times because she wants somebody else to raise her babies. And it's interesting because hers are the big ones, these big ones, even though they're speckled. That one's blue. This is the red-eyed vireo one. And so the other one's white with some speckles. And so sometimes you can't tell the difference, but other ones you can really tell. Now hers is the big one again, and this is in the weed wobbler's nest, so they're similar. But this one's interesting. This is her, the blue one, the big one. It's always the big one. And I often wonder, and when you go online, you can see all different colors, and they don't look anything like the mama bird that she's laying her eggs in. So I think, are they colorblind? Or they just say, oh, well, it's there, I'll just take care of the baby. I don't know what they do. But anyway, she lays them in there, and then the little baby is always born 1 or 2 days earlier, and he's got the same selfish nature as the mama does. And he wants to be the only one in that nest. So he has a scoop in his back, and he will get over there until he can get the egg in his scoop of his back. He will bring it to the edge of the nest, as close as he can get to the nest, and he pushes it out of the nest. And he goes around and he does that with every egg that is in that nest. And if it's a baby bird in that nest, he pushes it out too, because he's going to be the only one in that nest. And if he doesn't push them out, like the cowbird won't bother, because the cowbird is so much bigger than the other ones. And when he opens his mouth, who do you think gets the food? He does. And then the mama spends the rest of her time feeding him. Now the little bird is the mama bird, and the cuckoo bird is that big bird. And so she goes and gets food, and she comes back and she brings food, and she comes back and she brings food. She's constantly feeding this thing. And it screams so loud that when other birds fly by, they feed him too. So he's always getting food from everybody. But the problem is he's so noisy and makes so much noise and squawks so much that the enemies know where he's at, and he becomes food for the foxes, the weasels, or the hawks. And that is the cuckoo bird. So if you want to stay, you can, but I thought maybe you would enjoy the lessons of the cuckoo bird, because now we're going to talk about what we learned from this. So if the children want to be dismissed, you're more than welcome to go. If you want to stay, it's up to you. So we're going to look at the lessons from the cuckoo bird. Now, she wasn't concerned about training her babies. She just wanted them. And she wanted an environment where somebody else was taking care of them. And today we see a lot of that going on too, that people are looking for other environments to raise their children. They may pick the daycare center. They may pick babysitters, grandparents, other people. And there are times that 2 incomes are needed. And so tell parents, if you have to do that, find somebody that's got the same values as you do. Now for us, we decided that we were going to go to a 1 family income, and that there would be some sacrifices that we would have to make. We had to size down because we chose to stay home. I wanted to stay home with my children, and then I homeschooled them. And it was interesting, after I homeschooled them, when I went back to finish up my degree, I was actually in some classes with my oldest daughter. If you don't think that feels weird to be in college with your daughter, it feels really strange. I thought, I better get this right, But she was so gracious. She said, Mom, if you don't understand something, I'll help you through this. She was so proud for me to be there. But anyway, we're always looking for something, but we decided to stay home so I could raise my children. But a lot of people are not doing that. They don't have a lifestyle where one person can stay home. And I know that when we first started working with my children, I had the TV, and I had a crank-up swing. So I'd put the child in the swing and crank it up and then let it move back and forth. And she started watching TV, and she was watching this bird. And every morning, she was about 3 years old, she'd wake up and she'd say, Mama, T, bird. Do you know what bird she was talking about? Big Bird. She wanted Sesame Street. And I just, every morning she cried for Sesame Street, for Bird. And I just thought, Lord, that's not what I want. I want her to cry for you. I want her to long for you. So I had to ask the Lord, okay, what is it that I need to do to make the changes for my daughter to love you? And so my husband and I decided one was to get the TV out of the home because it did rule us. But we didn't want to get rid of it, so we actually put it in the closet, and we were only going to take it out for special occasions. Well, there was a lot of special occasions that it came out. And then it got to where we just didn't bother taking it out. We just opened up the closet doors, and we were watching TV in the closet doors. And we thought, whoa, wait a minute, I think this thing's got a hold on us. So I called my sister-in-law, and she had the family piano. And I said, would you make a trade? If I gave you our TV and some of my husband's guns, can we get the family piano? She was more than happy to make the trade. We got the best trade out of that. So we got the family piano. So anyway, like I said, we had to make some real changes because I didn't want my children to be self-centered. I didn't want them to be raised like this cuckoo bird where all it thought about was self. But in order to work with your children, you have to make changes because self isn't just going to go away. It just strengthens day by day. So you have to make some changes. And that's what I decided, that I wanted obedient children, and so therefore the Lord's just going to have to show me how. God has given parents their work to form the characters of their children after divine pattern. By his grace, they can accomplish the task, but it will require patience, painstaking effort, which is true, no less than firmness and decision to guide the will and restrain the passions. So God wants us to guide their wills and restrain their passions. Here's your work, parents, to develop the characters of your children in harmony with the precepts of the Word of God. This work should come first, for eternal interests are here involved. The character building of your children is of more importance than the cultivation of your farm. It's more essential than the building of houses to live in or of persecuting any manner of business or trade. Now, I realized in myself that it needed to be my first work, but it wasn't. It was my last work. My house was more important to me. My friends that called were more important to me. And when I saw a discipline problem, my friends were here, they called me, I didn't take care of it. I just kept talking to them. And then when I got off the phone, I dealt harshly with my children for being rude. And so I was just letting their character develop in an un-Christ-like way. And the fact that I was responding to them in such an un-Christ-like way wasn't helping them either. And what the Lord was trying to tell me is, get off your phone. I need you and me to have a relationship here so you can lead your children. So I had to make some drastic changes, and I've never been sorry for the changes that I've made, but it did take some decision on my part. A character formed according to the divine likeness is the only treasure that we can take from this world to the next. Now, I did give you some handouts, and I did try to include every Spirit of Prophecy quote so you would have them. You don't have everything in there, but you do have all the Spirit of Prophecy quotes. So, but if you want to take pictures, you still can, but I did provide that for you. And I wanted, like I said, my children to be witnesses for Christ, and I'm so thankful that my children did grow up to love the Lord and serve him. If Christian mothers will present to society children with integrity of character, with firm principles and sound morals, they will have performed the most important of all missionary labors. Their children, thoroughly educated to take their place in society, are the greatest evidence of Christianity that can be given to the world. This is found in Child Guidance 163. And I remember when my children were small, I was telling a mother in Israel that I really want to be a missionary. I don't know what God wants me to do, but I really would like to do some type of mission work for him. And she said, well, Cinda, what are your children? And I said, my children? She said, no, Cinda, what are your children? And I realized they are my mission work. That's what God had given to me, was to raise them for him. And Stacy always wanted to be a Bible worker. When she was 6 years of age, she wasn't reading yet. She said, I want to give Bible studies. And I said, okay, I'll teach you 7 texts, and I'll take you door to door. No one turns down a child from giving a Bible study. And so I took her around, and all she could read were those 7 texts. And then, of course, we had to learn how to read. But she could do those. And then my youngest daughter, Autumn, went to school at Andrews, and it was a very intense program. And then she wanted to do Bible work. So she took off a year and a half afterwards to do Bible work. And then she actually worked in academies, and she taught Bible when she was in academy. And so the Lord will bless you. My girls have become the missionaries that I wanted to be. They've been doing that work. It is the duty of those who claim to be Christians to present to the world well-ordered, well-disciplined families, families that will show the power of true Christianity. Child Guidance 2:33. So with that in mind, I had this concept that children could choose to be righteous and walk in the way of the Lord. And if they chose not to be righteous, they would joyfully and willingly take the rod of correction, which we'll be talking about Sunday. Now, I didn't share my thoughts with anybody because they may have told me that I was nuts, but I didn't know I was nuts, so that's what I started to do, is share in a way that my children would choose to be right, and if they didn't choose to be right, they would bring that rod to me. And they did. Every time my children had to be corrected with the rod, they would bring it and say, Mom, I have sinned. I need you to use the rod. And somebody said, well, that's because you have girls. It doesn't work for boys. And so I did. I prayed for a boy. And I said, Lord, I don't want just a boy. I want a very strong-willed boy. And I want a bad boy. And one that struggles with obedience. So we actually prayed for this little guy. His name was Danny. The Lord brought him into our home. The mom had cancer, which was sad, but she needed someone to watch Danny for 6 to 8 weeks. And so we took Danny into our home. And God worked with him too. And I remember when we had it, we have what we call family powwows, which I'll talk to you later about what that is. And it was a decision that we need to make as a family because my girls would be in this child training too at Danny. So we sat down as a family and said, we got a call from the mom and they've asked us to take Danny. And my girls said, oh, Mom, not him. He can be really bad. And I said, well, good, God's opportunity. So we prayed through it and we decided to take Danny, and we had him for 8 weeks. He was a blessing in our home. And anyway, these methods worked on him too. And when he had to be disciplined, he brought me his rod. And like I said, we'll talk about the rod on Sunday. But it does work because boys and girls are different, but fallen nature is fallen nature. And so they have the same nature. But so the things I'm going to be sharing with you will show you how to prepare our children for that. True discipline, True discipline is discipling my child to be like Christ. The object of discipline is the training of the child for self-government. He should be taught self-reliance and self-control. Child Guidance 2:23. So what I saw in my study is that God was calling me to do two things with my children: to guide and enlist their will, which we're going to be talking about that tomorrow, and teach them self-control. And discipline techniques either strengthen our child's self or helps our child to overcome self. Now, some of the common methods that are used for raising children are ignoring them, bribing them, threatening them, letting the child rule, commanding or forcing the will. And we're going to go through each one of these. And I call these, they're not God's methods, they're actually man's methods. And I tried all these, and they weren't helping my child. I wasn't seeing the character change that I wanted. So I know these weren't going to work at all. So what do man's methods do? Ignoring or letting the child rule, self is in control. Bribing or threatening, self is in control. Commanding or forcing the will, the child has no self at all. And for ignoring, the one that most people do are temper tantrums. And I had one that when she would throw a fit, she would get louder, especially if I walked away. She'd get louder so I could hear her. And I remember my mom in my bedroom, I had a little dresser and there was a mirror in front of it. And when I was being bad, my mom would put me in front of that mirror. And I could see myself. And I would cry. You know how those fake tears come? And I could cry and cry and cry. My mom would shut the door because she didn't want to hear me. So I would stop crying, open the door to make sure she heard me, and then I'd start crying again because it's no fun if no one's listening to you, So you want to make sure somebody's listening to you. Anyway, I went home one year, and I had, my niece is about 15 now. She was 3 at the time. And I went home, and my dad said, go ask Taylor how to throw a temper tantrum. So I went, and I asked her, and she's 3. So I said, Taylor, do you know how to throw a temper tantrum? She said, yes, Aunt Cinda, come, I'll show you how. So she took me in the bedroom, and she got down. She said, we have to get on our bellies. And she had me follow everything she was doing. She said, we got to get on our bellies. And she said, and then what you got to do is you got to put your hands up here, and then you're laying down, and you got to kind of peek a little bit because you want to see if anybody's watching you. So you kind of peek a little bit, and then you just kick your legs, and you scream, and you kick your legs, and you scream, and then you look to see if it's working, and kick, but don't let them see you or doing it. And she walked me through this whole thing of a temper tantrum. Now, if a child can tell you how to throw a temper tantrum, you know they know what's going on. And so the only way to get rid of temper tantrums is do not reward them. If you reward them, they're going to do it more. So you make sure you're not rewarding that. The next one is you give your child instructions, and then you don't follow through. Or worse, you ignore the child when they give it, and you don't make sure they're doing it. So whenever you give instructions, you need to make sure you're there to follow through with them, that you're not walking in the other room, you're making sure that they do it, and you have to just, so your instructions are important to them. Teach your child that your word means something, because when you let them ignore your word, what it's teaching them, excuse me, is that your word really isn't important to them. When parents fail to require prompt and perfect obedience in their children, they fail to lay the right foundation of character in their little ones. They prepare their children to dishonor them. When they are old and bring sorrow to their hearts when they are nearing the grave. This is Child Guidance 86. And this is so true. If you have a child that's disobedient when they're 2, they're going to be disobedient when they're 4, 6, and when they're 18. And we used to take in rebellious teens. And so you want to make sure your children are prompt. Now, these are some of the reasons why I found parents ignore their child. One, they may be too tired. They're not paying attention. They tell their kids something, and then they run off and do something else. They're just not staying on top of things. Or they want the child to like them. I found this happen in single homes a lot because they want to be the good parent, and so they don't do it. Or a home where the parents are not both disciplining, and they haven't come to an agreement of what discipline should be in the home. And so one wants to be the good guy and let the other one be the bad guy. And that's not really fair. They do not like conflict. And I noticed that when, like if a child, the parent starts to correct him and the child starts screaming. I notice it in churches when I visit. The parent wants to go to correct the child, but the child's screaming and yelling. And so the parent is embarrassed. See it in the stores. And so they just quit. They just back away and they don't do anything because it's too embarrassing for them. Or they think they're protecting. I actually worked with a family that he was raised in a very abusive home. And because of it, he was so fearful of doing the same thing with his children. So he didn't do anything at all, which is bad too. There's a proper way to do it. Excuse me. So if your children do not feel the consequences of sins in the little things, then one day they're going to feel them in the bigger things. So we want to make sure that we're staying on top of that, and it's not loving to not correct our children. Ignoring teaches my child to have self in control, instead of being self-controlled, which is a surrender of self. So instead of ignoring the child, we need to respond to the child. And I'd like to do the temper tantrums first. I remember when my brother used to do temper tantrums, he would hit his head along the floor, and then my mom would come up and just give a little tap like that, a little harder. So he'd hit that floor a little bit harder than what he had planned, and that stopped it right away. My solution was always to hold the child as tight as I could, start singing, start praying, and rebuke the evil spirit. That's what we're told to do. Rebuke the evil spirit, because they don't have the spirit of Jesus at the time they're going through that. And if need be, I did use the rod of correction. And when I went to work in homes, that's the first thing I had to do was establish what to do with the child being out of control. So again, I would hold them. Now, when I became a teacher, and somebody brought me this little bear so I can show you, I had a student that he'd bite me, and I'm not going to have a kid bite me, So anyway, so I just prayed about it, and there was a man a long time ago. He's been dead for a long time, but his name was Al Wolfson, and he was an Adventist man. He actually worked in the Indian reservation, and the Indians did something with their children that I thought was fabulous. So I thought when I was praying about with this little boy what I was going to do, the Lord said, well, do that Indian hold with him. So now he was 7, so I had to wrestle him to get him. But I had to come up through his legs, and I'm sitting in a chair, and I grabbed the arms like this. And this thing works great because this is real limber. Kids aren't this limber. So it is harder. But anyway, you're wrangling them like this. And then what I'm doing is I'm sitting down, and then I sit back, and I lean the child back. So the child's actually laying down. And not laying down, but laying his feet up. His legs are going out here, and his hands are here. And I'm holding him just tight enough so he can't get away. And he's trying to kick, but he can't because I got his arms and his legs restrained. And then I started praying. And I said, I just need you to settle down. As soon as you do, I'm going to let you go. I'm not going to hold you here the whole time. Well, I will until you calm down. But I just need you to calm down. And then my class, this was in my classroom, so all the kids came and gathered around, and we started praying for the boy until he actually settled down. And it worked for him. And then I got a call from, of course, he went home and told Mom what the teacher did to him. And then I got a call from the superintendent of schools and said, that we can't really do that. And I said, would you prefer him to bite me? I'm not going to allow that. And they said, on that circumstance, I said, it wasn't hurting him. He had no marks on his hands when I got done, but it did stop it. And I'm just going to let you know when it happens again in my classroom, I'm going to do it again. And if you don't want me here, that's fine, but I'm going to do it again because I'm not going to allow the child to bite me. And I only had to do it twice, and that was it. That was the last time I had to do it. So it really worked for him. Another child that we had in our home, I did everything I knew what to do. Child training is really a relationship with Jesus. It's just praying, praying, praying. Lord, what would you have me to do? Because what works today for a child isn't going to work tomorrow. And so you just have to ask, Lord, what would you have me to do? And I couldn't calm this boy down, and the Lord said, cold shower. And you know what that means when you have a kid and a cold shower. It means you're going in that shower too. It's not just him. Same, I turned the cold shower on. I took that kid and we went in the shower. That was the last time he ever gave me a hard time. And it's the only time I ever had to do that was jump in a cold shower. But it stopped it. And that's the whole thing, is that we've got to stop that temper tantrum from happening. And we'll go through some of these on consequences on Sunday's talk, Discipline, the Rule of Love. And like I said, instructions, that's where you're going to make sure that your child understands. Now, I never required my children to do something that they didn't know how to do. So if I gave an instruction, I always made sure they watched me do it first, then we did it together, and then I let the child do it, and I watched them. And we'll go through some of those training sessions tomorrow and what those actually look like. And I just had 2 mothers call me yesterday. Matter of fact, they wanted to come here. They said, we were on this thing, wherever you sent that out to, and they said, these moms are talking about coming. And they said they were just too far away, but they wanted some instructions. And my thing is train, train, train. You do training sessions. For everything you want taught of your children, you do a training session. And so anyway, when you give instructions, you just want to make sure the child definitely understands what you're giving them. Among the first tasks of the mother is the restraining of passion in her little ones. Children should not be allowed to manifest anger. They should not be permitted to throw themselves upon the floor, striking and crying because something has been denied them which was not for their best good. I have been distressed as I have seen how many parents indulge their children in the display of angry passions. Mothers seem to look upon these outbursts of anger as something that must be endured and appear indifferent to the child's behavior. But if an evil is permitted once, it will be repeated, and its repetition will result in habit. And so the child's character will receive an evil mold. This is the time to rebuke the evil spirit. Child Guidance 92 through 93. And this is true when we look at tomorrow morning, that habits, you do something over and over and over, those become habits. And those habits is creating character. And she says this character is of an evil mold. Evil mold isn't character, it's going to God's kingdom. It's just not going to happen. And so we have to do something with those character traits. Bribing. The purpose of bribing is to offer something so the child obeys. There is not a parent who thinks it's okay to reward a child for being bad, and yet it's happening all the time. Now, in our home, we tried M&Ms first, that we would bribe them. If you just be good, I'll give you some M&Ms. Well, I had one child, neither one of them did well with sugar. One just kind of bounced all over the room, and the other one would sit in the corner and cry. So sugar affected them very differently, but it affected them. So then we went to raisins, because that's a natural fruit, right? So we bribed them with raisins. That's just as bad. I've heard a little kid, well, we were at a wedding, and they bribed her that if you walk up really nice up that aisle, there's cake waiting for you afterwards. I've heard people tell them toys as a bribe. The saddest one I had was, you're not going to go to heaven. And that is really sad to tell our children that we don't want them to not think God doesn't love them and not going to take them to heaven. We want to work with their character. So that one I always thought was the saddest one that we did for a child. But instead of disciplining the bad behavior, they blame it on somebody else. Like I said, they blame it on God. And do you see a problem with this? That parents are rewarding our children for bad behaviors. And so that's not what we want to do. So in bribing, the child chooses to obey or not obey according to how she feels about the reward. And that's so true. I had kids that they think about it. You know what? It's worth it to do this, even if I'm going to get in trouble, because I really want to do this. And so we don't want that. Bribing teaches my child to have self in control instead of being self-control. Now, one of the ones that we use a lot, or I see a lot, is whining. A child will whine and whine and whine, and I see it in stores. I remember being in a store one time, there was a little child whining, and I thought, you know what, God cares about my children. I bet God cares about her children too. So I just slipped back in a little corner, and I started praying for that child, that child would find a different way to respond to what that child needed. And the Lord came in and subdued that child while I was in that store, and the child stopped whining and started asking Mom politely for what she wanted. And I thought, wow, that's power, that God's able to even work with somebody else's kid that's not my child. And that mom didn't even know I was praying for her child. But we don't want to reward a whiner, because whining children grow up to whining adults. So we don't want to do that. Time out. The purpose of timing out is to give your child a chance to think about what's going on. And it's usually for if they're 2, it's 2 minutes. If they're 3, it's 3 minutes. If they're 5, it's 5 minutes. The problem that I've seen with that is that while the child is out on time out, they're screaming and crying the whole time. That's not a time out, because then you go get them after your 3 minutes, and you just rewarded them again. You know, so if they're going to be there for time out, it needs to be a quiet time. And I actually did use time out when I was a school teacher, and I used it in my own home too. I had a fish tank. And when I became a teacher, that's the first thing I asked the board if they would get me a fish tank for my classroom. Because my children would sit in front there, and we had one fish we named Spudnik. And Spudnik would go around and around and around. And it was very soothing to watch it just swimming around and around. And I found that it calmed them down, and then I was able to talk. So that's what I did in my classroom too. I would have them sit in front of the fish tank, and usually I gave them a memory verse too that they had to memorize while they were sitting there. That way they were calming down, and then we could talk about what we needed to do. So the timeout wasn't them screaming or yelling. Instead of bribing the child, we want to reward the child. So many parents do not even think to reward a child for good behavior. I actually work with ADD children, ADHD, and I'm going to share some of that on Sunday, and some of the methods that I use in my practice. But when I ask them, can you tell me what a consequence is, not one of them has ever given me a positive consequence. They've always given me a negative consequence. So most children don't even know what positive consequences are. And so we want to make sure, and when we look at standard and consequences, we're going to look at always start with a positive consequence and then give a negative consequence. But we want obedience because it's right and they love Jesus. So we reward because of obedience, not to get obedience. So there's a big difference. Some of our rewards can be praises, hugs, stickers, toys, food. You need to pray for my throat. I am losing my voice. I've done this before. I was giving a talk one time, and I got up to talk more right before. My voice, I didn't have one at all, and I walked in. I thought, oh, I got to do this. I can't even talk. And then I started talking in a strong voice, and then when I was done, it went away again. But we can do praises, hugs, stickers, toys, or food. Those can be rewards, but we just have to make sure we're giving them because they're obedient, not to get obedience. Now, Danny, again, I was going to take him shopping. Now, Danny had a problem that every time he went in the store, he touched everything. And I feel like a company loses money by the children touching and damaging packages, even adults. Because I know I don't like, when I go to get a package and I'm buying it new, I want it to look new. I don't want, and you know, there's a place in the store where they have discounted items because somebody's been touching them and messing them up. So I had one rule: when we go shopping, don't touch the merchandise. Now I could have bribed him and tell him, if you're good while I'm shopping, I'll get you a toy afterwards. But is it easy for him to be good? You know, I was setting him up for failure because I already know that when he goes in the store, he can't not touch. I already know that. So what I'm teaching him, besides don't touch, I'm saying be good so you get something. And that's really not the message I want. I wanted him to choose right because it was right and he loved the Lord. So instead, I asked him, I said, Danny, are you able to put your hands in your pocket? And he said, yeah, and he had like a sweatshirt on. And so he put his hands in his pocket. And I said, can you take them out easy too? And he said, oh yeah, see? And I said, is it hard? He said, oh no, watch. In, out, in, out. I got this. This is really easy. And I said, okay, so you know how to do this, right? You got this? He said, yeah, I got this. Okay. I said, well, when we go into the store, all I'm going to ask you to do is put your hands in your pocket. Okay? So all I'm going to ask you, and you've already shown me that you can do it, so I'm going to have you put your hands in your pocket. So we went into the store, and he had his hands in his pocket, and he saw something he liked, and he lifted up his hand. Now, it was in his pocket. So when his hand came up, he realized, oh, wait, because it was in his sweatshirt, I'm not to touch. So he put it back down. And then we walked around again, and he stuck his hand up. He didn't take him out of his pocket. And he went to touch again. He says, oh, I'm not supposed to touch. That's why my hands are in my pocket. So it helped to remind him. So we went through the whole store that way. I went through 2 stores, matter of fact, and the whole time he was trying to touch, but his hand stayed in his pocket. Well, the next store that I went to, I forgot to tell him to put his hands in his pocket, so he was touching everything. And I said, Danny, I'm so sorry, I forgot to tell you, put your hands in your pocket. So he put his hands back in his pocket, and after we went through the whole store, I said, Danny, could you have taken your hands out? He said, yes. I said, was it hard? He says, no, see, I can do it. It's so easy for me. And I said, that's right, it was easy. So at any time, you could have taken them out, right? At any time. He said, yes. I said, well, you chose then to keep them in your pocket because you could have taken them out. Because you chose to be obedient, I would like to reward that choice because I know how hard it is for you not to touch, and that was something you chose to do for me. So I want us to go over and look at the cars. And he liked those little, what are they called, toy pocket cars? I don't know, Matchbox cars? Matchbox, okay. Couldn't remember. I said, anyway, so I took him over there, and I said, Danny, I want you to pick out 2 of them. And so he had his hands in his pocket, and he was looking at them. He didn't even take his hands out, looking at them. I said, now's the time you can take your hands out, because you're actually going to buy one. But I do want you to be gentle, but pick 2 you want. So he picked 2 of them that he wanted, and we started walking out to go up to pay for them, and he started crying. And I stopped, and I said, what's wrong? What's wrong? He said, it feels so good to be obedient. And I said, you're right, it does feel good to be obedient. Always reward the child. Praise, hugs, thank yous. If it's a major battle that took place in the decision to be obedient or not, I always rewarded my children with something special. if it took a lot and I knew there was a battle going on and they chose that, I'd do something special for them. Man's method, threatening. Now this is very much like bribing, only the purpose of threatening is to offer something so the child obeys, but it's usually something unpleasant, where bribing is something positive. This is something negative, but it's still a threat. Threats can be spankings. It can be you stay at home, you're not going to get to go. And if you continue, you're going to get a spanking. And I never understood why parents actually do that, because they don't seem to follow through on their threats. Wait until we get home. That's the fear, because you just, oh no, what's going to happen when I get home? Or wait till dad gets home. That one I always thought was really sad. When we had something in our home that took place, my mom took care of it. We never feared my dad. Matter of fact, I just lost my dad. Oh, I'm going to cry. Sorry. I just lost my dad 3 months ago today. Sorry about that. I didn't think I'd do that. So my dad was a good man. And my mom wanted us to always to love him. And so I was never fearful of my father at all. He was just a wonderful man. The other is Santa. Santa's not going to bring you toys. And the saddest one is you're not going to go to heaven again. And like I said, all these things I've actually heard parents say. And these threats are usually idle. And I think it's really sad to avoid parental responsibility by passing it on to God instead of us taking care of it as parents. So the reason why parents may bribe or threat, they do not want to deal with the problem, too tired, don't know what to do, or no time. And I noticed that the enemy seemed to always bring up bad behavior when I was running out the door. I had to get to a doctor appointment. I had to do something, and there would be bad behavior. And you just don't have time. You got to get to the doctor office. And so I just told the Lord, I am not trying to avoid my responsibility here. I'm more than happy to work with the hearts of my children. But I just ask that you please have it happen when I'm not running out to the door to a doctor appointment. I can't take care of it. And he honored that to where I had the time that I could actually deal with them. In threatening, the child chooses to obey or not obey according to how she feels, again, about the reward. They like it, so they're going to judge it. If they'll obey, if they don't like the threat, isn't too bad. Okay, let me try that again. If the threat is bad, he obeys. If the threat isn't too bad, he disobeys. So they're actually looking at, is this worth it to me? Is this not worth it to me? And that's not what we want either, because threatening teaches my child, again, to have self and control instead of being self-controlled. Instead of threatening the child, we want to teach cause to effect. And I have a whole thing on that one at the end of this seminar. How do you actually do that? And the consequences are the only means for permanently changing a child's behavior. Parents that are trying to reason and talk their child into obedience will never get a permanent change. They may change for the moment because they're weary of listening to you, but it doesn't bring about that permanent change. Only consequences will make the change. So, and when possible, the best ones are natural consequences. So word or reasons do not stop children from fighting for what they want. The child only cares about the outcome. If a particular behavior brings about a positive outcome, the child gets what he or she wants, the behavior is going to be repeated. And so like I said, those parents that are, the kids crying, and the parent is rewarding them to get them to stop crying, that child knows, cry more because you get what you want. But if they don't like the outcome, they are going to change. Help the child to see that every decision brings a consequence, either good or bad. Logical consequences, I said, are the best. Now, when Danny was with us, we were out walking, and I told him, I said, Danny, I just want you to notice that this path, what do you see? And he says, well, I see a bunch of stumps and roots. Why are they so high? And I said, because people kept walking over them and walking over them, and the rain came, and so it settled down that dirt, and so these stumps are really high. Now, what I'd like you to do, Danny, is while we're walking here, I would prefer you to walk, because you may fall, you may stumble over one of those stumps or roots and still get hurt, but you're walking, so it won't be as painful. But if you're running down this path and you fall, it's going to be very, very painful. And so I would prefer if you walk. Well, anyway, Danny walked for a while, and then he decided he didn't want to walk anymore. So he started running down the path. And I could have stopped him because I knew what was going to happen, but that was his choice, and I'd rather him learn the natural way than for me to do anything. So I let him fall, and he did. And he started crying, and so I went and held him, and we talked for a while, and I prayed with him, and then I said, Danny, what happened? Why did you fall? He said, well, I hit one of those stumps. And I said, what did I tell you would happen? He said, you told me it would hurt. And I said, well, he said, it hurts. I said, okay, so you know it hurts. So, and that's why I asked you to walk. Now, Danny, you have a choice again. You can walk, or you can run and fall and get hurt again. Which one would you prefer? He says, I think I'll walk. And I said, well, I think that's a good idea. I think we will walk. So it was letting him make those choices. So we want our children to choose obedience. In order to do that, they need to realize the bad choices hurt. To help them see this, we need standards and consequences. And like I said, this one is on Sunday. We're going to go through a whole thing of how you set those up. But I did want to bring it up here just in case people aren't coming back. That for standard and consequence, they always go hand in hand. Now, these are just some of the ones that we had in our home. Now, I only put the negative ones up here, but we're really going to talk about Sunday, the positive, too, because I always start training with positive first. But these are some of the ones that we have. Turn off the light, pay money. Now, when they were little, we would go, this was a training session, we'd go out of the room, and they have to flip the light off, and then we'd walk out, and I have them in my arms. So turn the light off, and we'd go out the room. Turn the light off, we'd go out the room. And then we had a training session after we did that we forget to turn off the light. Uh-oh, it costs money. And so they had to go bring us a penny. And for them at that time, pennies were a lot of money for them. I remember the first time my daughter went shopping and she gave them $1. And she'd rather have 5 pennies than $1 when she was little, which is a good deal for me, because 5 was more than 1. So she wanted the 5 pennies. Well, I remember the day that she went and she shopped and she gave a $1 bill and the lady gave some money back. And she went, you lose money. You lose money. It was like all of a sudden it dawned on her that the little bit of the amount isn't the same as the cost. Does that make sense? Like she had 5 pennies, but $1 was worth a whole lot more than those 5 pennies were when she realized that. But anyway, so they had to pay money because we talked about electricity costing. Pick up toys. It went in my toy box, and there's a session we'll go through on that. And when it went in the toy box, they had to buy the toy back, either do a chore or my parents gave them money, so they would buy it back if they wanted it back. Play at the table, or they had to get down. Now, this one was really hard because my husband loved the dining table at lunch or breakfast or any time to talk about his science experiments. And he really had some good science experiments, but he would play with the fruit and do the sun and the moon and go around the earth, and he was always playing with the fruit. And so I just went to him and I said, you know, for you, I know it's a science experiment, but my girls can't tell the difference, and they get up here and they want to play with the food. So could you do the science experience during homeschool time for fun instead of at the table? Which he did. No hitting sister, they wrote love letters. No talk back, I used cayenne pepper for kids that were mouthy. Because soap I felt was a chemical, but cayenne's food is hot. And we're going to burn out that sin. So we used cayenne. Do school papers or go to school without them? Now, when I was actually a school teacher, I had parents that would actually do the paper for the child. And I thought, that child's not learning anything from that by you doing the paper. And you could tell a child's handwriting and her stories compared to a parent's story. They're not even close. And it would have been better if that child had just come to school without the paper and had the consequences of what happened. So remember, standards and consequences go hand in hand. You cannot separate them. So if there's a broken standard, you take the child to read the consequence that's on the poster. And I always posted, like for Danny, we had a poster board, and I took pictures of him doing the chore and what happens if he did the chore. So I always had the middle was our standard that we did, what was supposed to be done. And then we had a picture of the negative consequences if he didn't do them, and then one of the positive consequences if he did them. So he could see. So I always took him to the poster so he could see what the consequence was going to be. And I remember him telling me, but I don't like that consequence. And I said, well, then don't break the standard if you don't like it. So don't break the standard, it's that simple. And so he started realizing they're never going to change. If you do this, this is going to happen. If you do that, that's going to happen. So it never changes. So he knew what to do if he didn't like the consequence, and then he wouldn't do. So standard broken, consequence required. The rules: do not start every day with brand new standards. Instead, start every day with new choices. Daily mete out the consequences for broken standards. If you start your standards new every day, because it's not standards, those are always the same. It's the consequences that make the difference. But if you start with a new standard every day, you're never going to grow in this experience. Your children aren't going to grow. So you have to have your standard, and then it's a choice. They can choose to do it this way, or they can choose to do it that way. So they choose, and once they make their choice, just reward them for the choice they made. If it was a good choice, they get a good reward. If it was a bad choice, they get a bad reward. Very simple. And I just feel like child training ought to be simple. There shouldn't be a whole lot of things we have to do, and so I try to make it simple. Do not reason, why did you do that? Doesn't matter. Don't negotiate. You need to share. Don't give them another chance. They've already broke the standard. It's already done. So just take your child to look at the poster, find the standard and consequence, mete out the consequence. Like I said, that simple. So if my child hits her sister, she writes a love letter. She hits the sister, she writes another love letter. She hits her sister, she writes another love letter. So two things happen. The child either stops doing it, or they get really good at the consequence. In this case, writing love letters. Either way, good comes from it. As long as you restate your standards every day, you will get nowhere in character development. So the next one is letting the child rule. They make decisions. Now, this behavior is carried on from babyhood. When babies are first born, we know that they start crying for their needs and their wants. And of course, parents are there to help them. And we try to get to them before they start screaming and yelling. But it is a natural thing that babies will do because they don't know yet how to express their wants. But babies grow into toddlers, and somewhere in that change from a baby, you have to let that baby know you don't scream and yell for what you want. You've got to do some training sessions because they're no longer a baby. There's a book out there called Mercury's Child, and he talks about it's like men are from Mars, women are from Venus, babies are from Mercury. And you want them to be an earthling, so they can't act like a Mercurian. They have to act like an earthling. So you're taking them out of that place where they're at. And so you have to stop it at some time, because if you don't, then you get teenagers. And like I said, we took in teens into our home, and these were Adventist teens. Some of them thought they were pregnant. Some of them were in demonic worship. The one child that we took, she would cut herself, and they had these, I don't know what they were, seances or whatever they had. But she was really cut up. Anyway, she came to, I had 3 summers with us. And one summer, her mother, we were having prayer meeting, and her mother found her demonic Bible. And she had thrown it into the fire 3 times, and the Bible jumped out. And she threw it back in, and the Bible jumped out. So she called us and said, we don't know what to do here. And I said, well, we're having prayer group right now. We'll pray. We'll leave you on the phone. We'll pray. And after we get done praying, you throw the Bible back into the fire. So we prayed and asked the Lord to consume that evil. And when we got done, said amen, she threw it in, and it just went up and spoke, So it's, all this. When you actually work with children, you can see the devil working in the hearts of children. Like I said, we took in rebellious teens, and you can see the same girl. She came years later. She had 2 children by this time, and no, 1 at this time, and I could see the devil working through her child. And I said, you've got to start taking some things out of your life. You have opened up the door for the enemy to work here, and that's why your child's going through what your child's going through, and you got to start closing some doors. So we need to sit down and see what avenues the devil feels like he has a right to be in your home and get those taken care of. And anyway, she got in touch with me, I don't know, I'd say maybe 3 years ago, maybe 4. And we stayed in touch while her kids, as she got older, but she became a strong Christian. And she just said, I can't thank you enough for loving me, being so unrighteous that you love me. because it changed my character and I was able to give my children something better. So we already talked about this is a child giving orders. Now, when I was asked to do a church and I was staying in these other people's home, I never go in and correct your kids. You know, if everyone says, I don't know if I want her in my home. I don't know if I want her to correct my children. I don't ever correct anybody's children unless you ask me to correct your child. But anyway, I was staying at this lady's house while I was doing this seminar, and the little girl wanted to go out and get pizza. Well, the mom wanted Mexican food. And I knew the minute that little child said, well, I want pizza, we were going to go for pizza. We weren't going to go for Mexican food. Mom didn't know that, but I knew that's what was going to happen. And so there was a real battle going on between what they're going to eat between these two. And, of course, we went out for pizza. And I've seen even 2-year-olds rule the home, that they're the ones that are deciding what they're going to do and what they're not going to do. So if parents, no is no, and the parent wins. If parents, no is no, and it stays no no matter what, the parent wins. But if the parent says no, but the child starts fighting and arguing to where the parent changes and says yes, that child knows that all they have to do is push mom a little bit further. And we had a friend, he trained horses, and he said, when you start training a horse, has anybody here trained horses? Anyway, he says, when you train a horse, you have to stay with it until the horse is trained. Even if it's through the night, you just stay, because wherever you stop, that horse knows, oh, I don't know that it knows time, but that took 5 hours. I think I'm going to push 7 hours and see if we can do this. And the horse will push you and push you. But if you stay with it until the horse is trained, the horse is always going to obey you. And children work the same way. That once they know how far they can go, they're going to push you further. But if they know they can't, then they're going to give up. They demand your exclusive attention. That's the child that acts up when you're on the phone. They always are talking to you. Somebody else is trying to talk to you, and they want to talk to you. They don't like anybody else there. They want to be the center of attention. That's a problem, too. They talk back or they argue. The child does not believe, as I say, your no is not no and your yes isn't yes, so they're going to argue until they get their way. They pout to get their own way. I've seen that quite a bit with children, especially in little girls. I don't know. Anyway, I've seen that more with young children, little girls. Rude, they question your authority. They require you to explain your actions. You never have to explain your actions to a child. You just say, I said it, you do it, that's it. There's no explanation. But at the same time, like I said, we had family powwows, which I'll explain, because one of my girls do have a place that they can talk in the home, but not when I'm asking you to obey. But you can always call a family powwow, and we can discuss that, and we'll go through that. Because you want your children to be able to have a voice too, but you want them to learn to obey first. Train the parent. So I've seen parents say, and I did this too, it's time to go, and the child keeps playing because their will hasn't become your will yet. And so you wait for them. Now your will has become the child's will. When they're ready, now you go. And so we're letting the child decide what's right and what's not right or what needs to be done. So the obedience is not prompt. And if your child is not obeying your instructions, you need to stop and make sure they follow through in what you're asking. And I always saw this more, like I said, in single homes, the only child, the child may be treated, the strong-willed parent and a strong-willed child and a passive parent. I've seen that. And if you allow it, then your teens have no respect for your authority. They tell parents what they're going to do. And your child will bring sin in and out of the home. Letting the child rule teaches my child to have self and control instead of being self-controlled. Instead of letting the child rule, parents should rule the home. One precious lesson which the mother will need to repeat again and again is that the child is not to rule. He is not the master, but her will and her wishes are to be supreme. Thus she is teaching self-control. Child Guidance 92. When Danny came into our home, we were just sitting there eating. He was going to be going in a couple of days. He would be coming to live with us for 6 weeks. We ended up having 8 weeks. But He was going to live with us. And we were just eating, and he said, at my house, I go to bed at 9 o'clock. Now, what do you think he was telling me? He's got the rules. He was letting me know. And I said, well, that's nice, Danny. At my house, you'll go to bed at 7 o'clock. So we were still eating, and he said, at my house, I go to bed at 9 o'clock. And I said, Danny, that's nice. At my house, you're going to go to bed at 7 o'clock. The third time, he wasn't quite as sure, and he said, but I go to bed at 9 at my house. And I said, I know you do, but at my house, you're going to go to bed at 7, because we're going to get up early, we're going to have worship, and we have a lot of planned in our day, and so you're going to go to bed at 7. The fourth time, he said, but I go to bed at 9. And I said, I know, but you'll go to bed at 7. And then a few minutes went by, he says, I'm going to bed at 7, huh? It's like, yeah, Danny, you're going to bed at 7. You know, it took him a while to get it. So we were doing Bible studies with the family, and their little girl, whenever we start, she was young, she was in the arms, she'd start screaming and crying, and she was tired, but she'd start screaming and crying during Bible worship. So I asked her, Mom, may I take her outside? So I took her outside, and I held her tight, like I do, and I started praying with her, and I said, I need you to go to sleep, because we're having Bible studies, and you're tired, so I need you to go to sleep. I was out there 30 minutes working with her, and just praying and holding her close to me where she couldn't fight, and her arms couldn't move around, so I had her arms and kind of like this teddy bear. So I had her all wrapped up real tight against me, so she couldn't move, she couldn't go anywhere. So she was like this, and we were praying, we were walking, and I told her she needed to go to sleep. Anyway, she finally fell asleep, so we brought her in, laid her down, and then the next week she came in, and I went out again. It took me 15 minutes to get her to go to sleep. The third time she came, and I just picked her up. I didn't even walk outside. I just picked her up. She looked at me like, and that was it. She just went to sleep. Like, I'm not going to fight you. I know I'm not going to get anywhere. I'm not going to fight you. When I was doing child training stuff, I was up in Montana doing a camp meeting, and everyone, they think I'm a miracle worker, and I'm not. I'm really not. I really don't know what to do. God knows what to do. I just do what I know externally, and God does internally. So Mama brought her 1-week-old baby to me and said, here, do something. You know, it's like, okay. And God was so good, because out in the field when I was out there, God worked miracles instantly. It didn't work that way at my home. Sometimes we were in a battle 6 hours, you know, but out there God worked quick. And so she brought this baby to me, and I'm going to use my baby doll again. Anyway, so I was working with this baby. So I put her in my arms, and I said, well, what's the problem first? And Mom said she needs to go to bed. She's tired. And I said, okay. So anyway, I was talking to this baby, and I said, you're going to go to sleep. And this baby the whole time's going, ah, right in my face, you know. And I said, I just ignored it. So I said, you're going to go to sleep. As soon as I pray with you, I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to go to sleep. And I'm going to do what God tells me to do, and that's hold you tight and pray with you, and God's going to do inside of you what I can't do. Now, the whole time, this baby is screaming at me. It doesn't look like this is going to work at all, you know. So, and this is totally by faith. So anyway, I held the baby. I started talking to the baby, and after I prayed, the baby was going, ah! And I said, amen. The baby goes, ah! And that was it. The baby went right to sleep. And so God blesses that way, and I'm so thankful, because it's His power. All we can do is do what He tells us to do, and He works in the heart of our children, and He can change them. Give them nothing for which they cry, even if your tender heart desires ever so much to do this. For if they gain the victory once by crying, they will expect to do it again. The second time, the battle will be more vehement, and that's what we just learned. Child Guidance 92. Like I said, from early age, children learn what they can get away with and what they can't. And they're going to push you more than you. They're going to keep pushing you because they don't have a problem with that, but you're going to give in just because you're so exhausted, you're so tired, and you can't give in to them. That is not the character we're wanting our children to have. The first care of the parent should be to establish good government in the family, The word of the parent should be law, precluding all arguments or invasions. Children should be taught from infancy to explicitly obey their parents. Child Guidance 85. So your no needs to be no, your yes needs to be yes, period. I used to tell my children, you asked, I answered. And this happened in classrooms too, and I know my youngest, when she's a nurse now, but when she was teaching, she had some defiant kids in her classroom, and she would tell them what she expected, and you could tell there was a battle, and she'd just stare at them. And that's really uncomfortable when somebody's staring at you like that. And she said, sometimes, Mom, I thought, oh, this is going to work. And I just pray, Lord, help them, because I don't know how long I can stare like this. And then the other one, the kid would go, oh, okay, I'm not going out. You know, because one would walk out towards, and she said, stop. He turned around and came back and sat down. And so the Lord works that way. She said, I'm glad I listened to your child training stuff, because I used it a lot when I was in school. The other is, once a child asks you to do something, you must follow through on what you're doing. Now, when Danny was there, his parents, this is before he actually came stay with us, Danny found a stick, and he wanted to do it as a bow and arrow. That's how he wanted to use his stick, and his dad wanted him to use it as a fishing pole instead. So he made the fishing pole, and there was a battle going on for about 30 minutes here, and Dad said, no, you're going to do the fishing pole. That's it. That's how we're going to do it. It's a fishing pole. So he did the fishing pole, and then he came back and said, I don't want a fishing pole. I want a bow and arrow. I want a bow and arrow. I don't want a fishing pole. And there was a battle going on, and he said, I don't want a fishing pole. I already did the fishing pole. It's no more fun. I want the bow and arrow. And then the father said, okay, son. And he made him the bow and arrow. And it would have been better for the father to just have gone ahead and do it. But a lot of parents don't know, they haven't decided in their own mind what they want and what they don't want. And so the child starts negotiating, and the parent's trying to make a decision during that negotiation. That's not parenting. When your child's negotiating, you're trying to make that decision. You need to be firm, decide what you're going to do, and then just stick to it. But anyway, just like when he said, I am going to bed at 7, right? You stick to it, he gets the message. And in fact, when he left us, the last day, his mom was going to pick him up the next morning, and he was crying that night. And I said, are you okay? And I said, you ready to see your mama? He said, yeah, but I love your home. And I said, really? Why? He said, I know when to eat. I know when to sleep. I know what's expected of me. I know what I can do. That he was saying, I like all the rules in your home. I like all the schedules. And I'm not going to be able to have time to go through that, but I have a talk on schedules. And when I used to go in a home, I would put the family on a schedule first, because 50% of my discipline would be taken care of before I ever got there, just by having consistent schedules. But sometimes working with families, getting a schedule was really hard. We'd be at it a year or two trying to get a schedule for them, because schedules are not easy. But they like it. They like that security, and Danny did. Great harm is done by lack of firmness and decision. I have known parents to say, you can't have this or that, and then relent, thinking they may be too strict, and give the child the very thing they at first refused. A lifelong injury is thus inflicted. It's an important law of the mind, one which should not be overlooked, that when a desired object is so firmly denied as to remove all hope, the mind will soon cease to long for it and will be occupied in other pursuits. But as long as there's any hope of gaining that desired object, an effort will be made to obtain it. When it's necessary for parents to give a direct command, the penalty of disobedience should be as unwavering as are the laws of nature. Can't get any clearer than that, can it? Children who are under this firm, decisive rule know that when a thing is forbidden or denied, no teasing, no artifice will secure their object. Disappointments are a natural part of life. A child needs to learn how to handle those. There's going to be a lot of times people are going to say no to them, and they've got to know how to handle no's. And if not, your teens start blaming you, and I see this a lot with ADD children. It's your fault. You're the one that's causing this. You're the one that's doing this. They start blaming others. But if they know there's no negotiation, then they'll change their outcome. Hence, they soon learn to submit and are much happier in so doing. The children of undecided and overindulgent parents have a constant hope that coaxing, crying, or sullenness may gain their object, or that they may venture to disobey without suffering the penalty. Thus they are kept in a state of desire, hope, uncertainty, which makes them restless, irritable, and insubordinate. God holds such parents guilty of wrecking the happiness of their children. Isn't that powerful? This wicked management is the key to impotence and irreligion of thousands. It has proved the ruin of many who have professed the Christian name. Child Guidance 284. Like I said, the reason why parents are going through this is they themselves have not decided. I was working with a family and they had screen time, and the child was allowed 15 minutes of screen time. But at the end of the 15 minutes, the child started pleading again, can I have just 10 more minutes, just 10 more minutes, just 10 more minutes, negotiating. And so they gave him 10 more minutes. Well, then the next night, how many minutes do you think he wanted? 10 more minutes of that. And then the next night, how much more? 10 more minutes of that. And the parent, even though they said 15 minutes, in their mind, they really hadn't settled on the decision. Is 15 minutes really what I'm going to allow or not? Like I said, they haven't decided. Once a parent can decide, then they can set down the rule for the child. We had some that we had in our home that were called non-negotiables. These were things that there is never, never, never a time that our children could negotiate these. These were the set laws. There's no discussion. If there's a problem, then we deal with submission, because there's not anything that we're going to negotiate on this. One is obedience. My obedience always had to be prompt, perfect, and pleasant. And that pleasant was willingly and cheerfully doing what they were asked to do. The other is respect. The respect had to be towards God, parental authority, any adult authority. Siblings that were going back and forth. My children weren't allowed to be disrespectful to each other. So if I saw them being disrespectful, they went and held hands and prayed for each other. Stacy would pray for Autumn. Autumn would pray for Stacy. There was no disrespect that was taking place with them. Politeness, that one came under respect too. I felt like a child needs to be polite when you're talking to them. They can't be rude. They can't talk back to you. They can't tell you no. That those are not acceptable behaviors for a child, especially towards a parent. And if you don't teach it towards you, then they're going to have that disrespect towards other authorities too. So you want to make sure they have respect towards you. And rudeness is never acceptable. Honesty, no lying, no cheating in games, no stealing. And I had to learn this one way back when we had, before cell phones and all that. You could call and ask for yourself. Like I would be at my mom's house and I'd go home, and my mom wanted to know I got home safe. Well, you could call her phone number and ask for me. And if I'm not there, then you don't get charged for the phone call, right? So I would call and say, is Cinda there? And my mom would say, no, she's not here. And so we didn't get charged for the phone call. And the Lord said, that's dishonest. Pay the $1, the $2, whatever you pay, that's dishonest. Because I was lying. Because I knew I wasn't there. I was on the other side, so I knew I wasn't there. So the Lord told me that's dishonest. So we want to make sure everything they do is honesty. And no stealing. My girl could not go into the bedroom and take something of her sister's without asking first, may I have this? Because it's stealing. Even though it's your sister, it's still stealing because you don't have permission to take something that's not yours. Manners, we're going to be looking at some of those tomorrow in the afternoon. Not being loud, not interrupting your conversations. Like I said, we'll cover some of that tomorrow. Also, non-negotiations with mistreatment of animals, people. That was non-negotiable. Instructions, if they were direct and I told a child what I expect for them, then we have prompt, perfect obedience. Anything health, I set up their nap times, their bedtimes, what they eat, their friends, medical decisions, clothing, those I set up. So those were non-negotiables. Safety, anything that would be dangerous to my child, whether it be their friends that they're having, maybe we didn't have computers back then, which was such a blessing. We didn't have cell phones back then, which was such a blessing. Life was very simple back then. So, but I decided even entertainment, what the kids listened to, what they couldn't listen to, I set all that up for anything that I felt was not safe in an environment. And then their education, I decided how I was going to educate them, their religious education, their homework, whatever I had, I made those decisions. So man's methods, commanding or forcing the will, the severe training of youth without properly directing them to think and act for themselves at their own capacity and turn of mind will allow. Wait, did I just click it? That by this means they may have growth of thought, feelings of self-respect, and confidence in their own ability to perform, will ever produce a class who are weak in mental and moral power. And I'm going to go back over this in a minute. And when they stand in the world to act for themselves, they will reveal the fact that they were trained like the animals and not educated. Their wills, instead of being guided, were forced into subjection by harsh discipline of parents and teachers. Now she has two concepts here. She says the severe training, that's the bad part, will ever produce a class who are weak in mental and moral power. The right part is without properly directing them to think and act for themselves. That's the good part, that we want them to teach and act for themselves as what they're able to do at that age. And she goes on to say, and when they stand in the world to act for themselves, is the bad part, they reveal that they were trained like the animals. Now, I knew that my girls were not always going to be in my care. There's going to be times they're going to be out there, and I wanted to make sure I trained them in such a way that when I wasn't present, they were still obedient. So, and that's what we want to do, is train our children, and that's where we have to enlist the will, and tomorrow we'll look at ways to enlist the child's will. To direct the child's development without hindering it is undue control, should be the study of both parents and teachers. Too much management is as bad as too little. The effort to break the will of a child is a terrible mistake. Minds are constituted differently. While force may secure outward submission, the result with many children is a more determined rebellion of the heart. Child Guidance 2:10. Commanding or forcing the will teaches my child to have no self instead of being in control. So instead of forcing the will, God says to enlist the will. We want to teach our children to will surrender and to do, obey, of his good pleasure. The strength of character consists of two things: power of will and the power of self-control. Child Guidance 161. Save all the strength of the will, for the human being needs it all, but give it proper direction. Treat it wisely and tenderly as a sacred treasure. Do not hammer it to pieces, but by precept and true example, wisely fashion and mold it until the child comes to years of responsibility. Children should early be trained to submit their will and inclination to the will and authority of their parents. When parents teach their children this lesson, they are educating them to submit to God's will and obey his requirements, and fitting them to be members of Christ's family. Child Guidance 2:10. Everyone may place his will on the side of the will of God and may choose to obey him, and by thus linking himself with divine agencies, he may stand where nothing can force him to do evil. Child Guidance 2:10. Tomorrow we're actually going to look at how to enlist the will. I have 3 ways that I did with my children and the rebellious teens that we took into our home, how to enlist the will. So tomorrow we're going to look at the 3 ways, the 3 judges in King Will. We're going to look at thoughts plus feelings equals moral power, and then how to use the higher and lower powers to enlist the will. And all 3 of these work, and it doesn't matter. When I had teenagers in our home, we found King Will was the easiest one for them to understand and grasp the concepts. Our girls liked using the higher and lower powers. I used these for myself. I actually was in Sweden, and I gave the presentation that I'm going to give tomorrow. And this man was in his 90s, probably 92, 93. He came up to me. He said, "That's the first time I've understood righteousness by faith. You may have thought you were giving a child training seminar, but that was for me. That's exactly what I needed to learn how to be obedient." And that's what I use. All these principles that I'm going to be sharing with you are what I practiced on myself first to make sure they worked, and then I taught my children how to use them.